conversation. I think you're mentioning you have some pretty cool like deployment stories you can talk about, depending on what we ask about, right?
Right.
Right. And then after, we'll talk to Cadet Stewart for a little bit, and then we'll have our guest hop on in the chair I'm sitting in, and we'll get cracking on those questions. So first of all, for those that don't know Cadet Stewart, can you give us a little bit of background and then what you do at the detachment as far as like your PSC job?
Sure. So I'm part of the lead lab execution team. So in the beginning of the year or of the semester, I was mainly working with the FTP squadron. So
Right.
setting up all the lead lab stuff for them and making sure that they were all squared away.
Okay, so it was like so lead lab was split in between both FTP lead lab and then regular lead lab?
Yeah, since we had all the lead labs split into different auditoriums, so we had enough lead lab members to work
makes
each
sense.
auditorium.
Right. Cool. When did you join the program?
I joined the program as a 150.
Right. I think actually you joined my flight, right? It was
Yeah,
Delta?
yeah.
Yeah. So that was what, spring of 2018? Was it spring of 2018?
I think so.
Right? Dang.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Time flies.
Yeah.
Before we get into those deployment stories, I'm just gonna keep asking a little bit more of the the ROTC stuff. So what's your favorite part about ROTC?
Ooh, my favorite part, honestly, I think it's just making connections with different people.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, I feel that too. I'm very people motivated.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before you joined the detachment, and then correct me if I'm wrong, you're prior Air Force,
Mhm.
and you enlisted how many years before you joined ROTC?
Just under 9 years.
Okay, so you were about a staff sergeant?
Yes.
Oh, you were a staff sergeant?
Mhm.
Awesome. So what were you doing on the Air Force side of things?
I was an intel.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
Awesome.
they call it a 1-0. So
Right.
yeah, just an intel analyst. I guess like the overarching one, since there's a lot of different intel AFSCs that you can go into. So mine was like the overarching intel. So we were mainly like the briefers.
Okay. I was about to ask, so I know that with the officer side, when I was interested in going and commissioning as an intel officer,
Mhm.
but I was asking a lot of questions, and they seem to like have to do a bunch of like that research, and then they go brief the higher ups real quick, and then that's pretty much their job, their routine. So were you doing the same thing, or were you like you were helping them, the intel officers were doing the same thing? Or?
No, it's the same thing. Yeah.
Awesome.
So there would be times where I guess depending on like the person's rank or just who they felt confident with going up there and briefing whichever wing commander or
Right.
general or who was it. But normally, yeah, it would just be, we would honestly like rotate and take turns
Wow.
briefing the wing commanders and things like that. So
Awesome.
actually, on one of my deployments, I was the only junior enlisted allowed to brief then Lieutenant General Goldfein.
Wow.
Mhm.
That's insane. What was the brief about, if I'm allowed to know?
So I was in Qatar, and the briefing were mainly on whenever aircraft get shot at or aircraft go down, we would brief the general on all of those aircraft, the location, and what brought them down. So whether it was like small arms or SAMs or whatever,
Right.
mortars, things like that.
Cool. So he was, at the time I'm assuming he was in charge of like the whole like ops group that was there at that specific deployment.
Yes.
So his planes and stuff were getting shot at, and you were
Exactly.
you're telling him
So
what was
he was
shooting
in
him?
charge of like all of the Air Force part that was in Afghanistan and that.
Wow. So then moving along with like the deployment stuff, I asked you about this earlier. What were some of those stories? What were you doing out there?
So I went on 2 deployments. My first deployment was actually just a little bit after I got to my first base,
Wow.
which was kind of shocking because they tell you like, oh, like, you're brand new, they're not going to send you.
Mhm.
And I think I was at my first base maybe 4 months.
Wow.
And they were like, how do you feel about Afghanistan?
Dang, and you took it?
So, yeah, they asked, but it's not really a choice
It's
kind of thing, yeah.
it's one of those, hey, like, do you want to do this? And then you're like, and they're like, no, do you want to do this? And
Yeah.
then like pushing you out the door already.
Exactly.
Wow.
No, but it was exciting. I was nervous and scared and anxious, and I felt very underprepared.
Mhm.
Felt, all I did was text school, like,
Mhm.
are you sure?
Okay. Like, why me?
Yeah.
No, that's awesome though. And so you went out there on your first deployment, and so yeah, you were intel, right? So
Mhm.
your assignment was to just.
So, my first deployment was very unique. I did a jet tasking, which is basically when they use Air Force airmen in deployments that are primarily for Army or
Oh, okay.
Marines, things like that. So when I deployed, I went to an Army unit. So before I left, I had to do a bunch of training, combat skills
Right.
training, all those different things that they have to go through so that I would know what I'm doing. So we learned how to drive Humvees. We
Oh.
did all that kind of stuff, all the land nav stuff and things like that. All the fun Army
Right.
things. Yeah.
Yeah. All the combat infantry
Exactly,
stuff. So
exactly.
you were learning all that. Wow. Wait. So it seems like you enlisted, you went to basic, out of basic, you went to tech school, and then you were straight into like combat training.
Yeah.
That's a lot of schooling just off the rip.
It was.
Wow.
It was like nonstop training. It was very unique because the person that I was replacing at the deployment was a tech sergeant.
Wow.
And at the time, I was a slick sleeve. I was an airman basic, like didn't have anything, and so then it was just kind of like, how am I the replacement?
Yeah.
Like, I don't
for
have
this experienced tech sergeant, right?
exactly. So I was just nervous, and they were, everyone's just really like assuring, and they just said, like, we wouldn't send you if we didn't think that you were competent.
Mhm.
They'll train you on anything that you need to know. If you have any questions, ask. If you make any mistakes, it's okay. Like,
Right.
ask for help, things like that. So
They really had your back.
Mhm.
Make sure you're good to go. So then you get out there. Did you have? You had your son at that time or no? Not yet.
No, not yet.
Not yet.
Nope.
Okay. And so then you come back, and how many months or years between your first deployment and your second deployment, or at least starting to get ready for your second deployment?
I think about a year.
Wow. So you got to do your job for a little bit, and then I assume it's the same thing. You're training training up for another deployment.
So then my second deployment was the standard Air Force deployment.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, that's right, because you
So-
said you're working with Army on the 1st one. So
Yeah. So my first deployment, I went with the task force actually.
Wow.
So yeah, so all the special warfare kind of dudes. So that's why I had to do all this extra training, deployed with like all this gear. Usually on Air Force, like big Air Force deployments, you go on like specific like aircraft, like commercial aircraft and things, just to get like into country, things like that. But on my first deployment, we actually flew to Fort Bragg and then just hopped on a C-17
Straight
right
there.
off the
Wow.
right off the
runway.
flight line. And
Wow.
so it was very you have like all your like your rucksack and things
Yeah.
like that, and it's just kind of like how you see like in commercials of like, oh, these people are deploying and
Right.
they're like on the flight line. It's usually not like that for Air Force, but
But
my
for
first
yours
one
it
was
was.
exactly like that. So I was freaking out.
Yeah, you were part of those commercials. So,
Yeah.
I actually just have a smaller question on that. So, all of the deployment like gear and stuff like that,
Mhm.
because I assume there's specific stuff that you get issued for deployments only.
Yes.
How does that go? Do you go like hit up LRS? You're like, yo.
Yeah, they give you basically all of these memorandums, if you will,
Mhm.
with the list of stuff that you need. And they say, hey, go to this place and just show them this letter and they'll get you everything that you need. And sure enough, I drove to that LRS place and I was like, hey, I'm deploying. They told me to show you this paper. They read it and that's their job, right? They know exactly what they're doing. And yeah, they were like, just grab that shopping cart. And I was just following them through the store, and they're
putting
just,
them in.
dumping stuff in there, looking at the list, and dumping it
Wow.
in there, and
What gear is different? Like, what do they suit you up with?
so I actually wore ACUs on my first deployment.
Oh, okay.
So since I was with the Army, they were like, well, we're gonna give you all of the Army gear,
Right.
only because it might raise some eyebrows if they see that there's Air Force people with us.
Right. If you're in ABUs over there.
Exactly.
So you had all of the ACU like Army gear. Awesome. Did they give you like all the cool like?
They gave me all types of stuff. They gave me like the gear if in case I needed to get like on a helicopter, like
Dang.
all types of stuff. Helmet. I deployed with an M4 and an M9. I deployed with all types of different holsters. The holsters that like you hide like in your back, like things like that. Deployed with really expensive like radio that could be like in the middle of Afghanistan and like call for help on it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that like a
Worth,
satellite radio?
I think so. I'm not too sure on the specs.
It's
All I
just
remember
high.
is like when they issued it, they were like, this radio is worth so much.
Right.
Like if you lose it, like they'll kick you out.
They'll get you back for it.
Yeah,
Dang.
like, you won't be able to afford this radio, so do
Wow.
not lose it. Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy. So they really suited you up.
Mhm.
So Cadet Stewart was out there. We had this conversation in our AS class. Who was the scariest like prior E, and everyone's like, oh, Cadet Lee, and I guess sometimes like others too, but all of the prior E's are like, no, Cadet Stewart. Now I'm realizing why you're the scariest, because you're out here like fully suited up, guns in the back, like hey, like that type of thing. That's awesome.
Yeah.
How long was your first deployment?
It was 6 months.
And how long was your second?
Also 6 months.
Okay.
Mhm.
I was wondering because I know that Air Force has this like rap for getting, like they get deployments and they're like the nicer deployments and then they're
Yeah.
also the shorter deployments.
Yes.
So
So I have worked with a lot of people who've been on 3-month deployments and
Mhm.
things like that. Which the way deployments go, I mean, you think of like 3 months is still like a long time, but
Mhm.
it's really not, because you spend like the first couple weeks there just in processing and like here's your room, here's where you work, like here's how to do your job, things like that. So by the time you're really settled in and doing your job, you're there, if it was a 3-month deployment, you're there a month and then it's already time to start out processing and
wow.
doing all that stuff. So that's what they say, like the 3-month deployment, it's like, it's nothing, it's vacation, you
right,
know?
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I heard that those are like blink of an eye, like were you even there
Exactly.
type thing.
Yeah.
Was the differences between your deployment, did it live up to the rumors? Like with Army, were you in the the really bad like rooms and stuff like that, and then Air Force you had more expensive?
Absolutely.
Really?
Yes. And it could have been also due to the fact that my first deployment was in Afghanistan and the second deployment was in Qatar.
Right.
So one like a war-torn country and the other one not so much,
Mhm.
right? So that could have played
Played
a
part.
part into it, but definitely, yeah, the camp that we were on in Afghanistan, the one that I lived in was called like a bee hut, and it was just made out of like these like planks of wood, like
Really?
just, like rough, like not like sanded down pieces,
Uh-huh.
like they were just like went to Home Depot, they were like, yeah, that one, and they
They
just
just
like
built a
nailed
shelter.
it together, yeah, like there were cracks in it and like
Wow.
yeah, things like that. All the walls were, I remember they were all uneven.
Wow.
They just cut out like doorways. There weren't
Uh-huh.
actual doors inside.
So they didn't like build the door, they just put like this box together and then cut out a door. Wow.
So
That's tough.
what everyone did is we'd go to the DX and they sold like these really long like bath towels,
Uh-huh.
and we would just hang that over the doorway, and that would act as our like door
Wow.
like, curtain.
So you're like pushing a towel to the side to. That's crazy.
Yeah.
But then you go to your second deployment and it's entirely different.
Yeah, we had a whole like room.
Like
we
a
had
hotel
little
room?
fridge in there. Oh no,
Wow.
it wasn't a hotel room. It was like those shipping containers. That's
Okay.
how I can describe it. It's
Right.
like one of those shipping containers that were outfitted to be
Uh-huh.
rooms. So yeah. So in that one, I only had one roommate, and in Afghanistan I had 4 other roommates. So it was 5 of us in this little like bee hut.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, living on these like terrible like, they were like these metal beds and stuff.
Oh,
It was
man.
just like really weird. And then yeah, in Qatar it was bunk beds. We had like wall lockers
Uh-huh.
and like a little mini fridge in there.
Dang.
And
Living lavish.
yeah.
That's awesome.
there was a really nice pool at
Really?
at Qatar. Yeah.
So you spend your free time at the pool.
At the pool. Yeah, there was believe it or not, there's even attached to the pool was a Dairy Queen.
Really? Okay, what is... Man, I need to get on my geography because yeah, I'm thinking like, oh, deployment to Qatar, you know, like similar to other deployments because it's titled a deployment, so it comes with like this stigma of like, okay, you're gonna go there and like really be sheltered kind of thing.
Yeah.
But a pool and a Dairy Queen
Yeah.
on deployment.
Mhm. Oh, I know.
Wow.
So anytime like you saw anyone outside of Air Force, so like Army or like the Marines out there, they're like, oh, this is our vacation time,
Right.
you know, like this is great, like
Right.
we'll stay here,
Uh-huh.
you know. But yeah, to us, like that's a really standard Air Force deployment to go there to that location. So just to give you like a reference
Yeah.
on the differences there. So
Yeah, I was about to say so the Air Force really does treat their people, take care of them.
For
I know
sure.
we're I've heard sometimes we're like referred to as the princess branch because
Yeah.
it's a little bit soft, somewhat
Yeah,
like,
the little sister.
yeah,
if you will.
right. Which is yeah, we could get into that, but I'll save that for off the podcast. So then, in both of or in the second deployment, you were doing more of your intel stuff.
Yes. So that one was like my traditional intel stuff. A lot of research, a lot of staying on the chats to communicate with the other units that are. So basically, we're supporting the units in Afghanistan.
Okay.
So any time like aircraft is going down, things like that, they're obviously on the airplane and they're sending all that through the chat. So we're getting all of those messages like real time, and we're the ones disseminating the messages out like, hey, you guys need to send airplanes out or helos out to go rescue these people. They're located here, things
Right,
like
okay.
that. So we're calling all the units, making sure those people got immediate help.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting because I guess there's like a job for everything, and sometimes I feel like in your case that type of job can someone get lost in like the big glory of things because you don't really think about like, okay, if this aircraft's getting shot down, how is it going to get communicated to everyone else and then get the support out? People think
Right.
it's like this really A to B type
Yeah,
thing,
they
but
just
there's the
call on
middle.
the radio and they
yeah,
just
they're like, hey, we
immediately
need
come
help, and
down.
then,
Yeah.
But there's a whole like unit and a whole
Mhm.
job tailored on
Exactly.
deployments to make that connection.
Exactly.
So that's really cool. And I know you mentioned earlier you were doing a bunch of interviews on like, or did I get that right? You were interviewing like some bad guys.
So interrogations. I guess interviews would be much nicer.
Sorry, I'm in the
term.
podcast
Yeah.
mindset.
So interrogations with the detainees at the Afghan jail in Afghanistan. So all of them were like Taliban, Al Qaeda, like Hezbollah, like all of those guys. And we're just, for the majority of my deployment was trying to get information, to know the whereabouts of Osama bin Laden.
Right.
Like that's our purpose there. Like
Interesting. So do you know any of like their language?
I do not.
You don't.
Mm-mm.
So how was-
so the interrogations would work. It would be 3 of us in the room with the detainee. So me, the analyst, and then one person's the interpreter, and then the other person is the interrogator. So the interrogator was the one who went to interrogator school, knows all the tactics, knows what to do. So they would talk, the interpreter would translate, and then I'm there like writing everything down. We all have like laptops and stuff, so we're all like communicating with each other. If there was any questions that I like would think of, I'd jot it down. The interrogator would see it, would ask, and so we were like in constant communication, trying to get information out of.
Okay. So it's like similar to how we're doing it here. For those that don't know the podcast, we have like this real-time document. That's why you see the laptop stuff. So if I type something like, where you at, like right here, you can see like this random typing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's similar to that type of thing, or?
Yeah, exactly like
Interesting.
that.
So you can just be like, hey, ask them this, and then they go and do that.
Exactly.
And the setup, I guess, for the interrogations, was it like a typical movie, like good cop, bad cop type thing, or was it like the other spectrum where it's like, or the other end of the spectrum where they're just hammering into dude and like, maybe not physical, but just like really trying to.
There's different interrogation methods, if that's what you're asking.
Right.
Yeah, and that's why they go to school, because they teach them exactly how to work out all of these different methods, and depending on how the detainee is responding to them is what methods they'll go with. So
Interesting.
Mhm.
That's dope. So And those were, the interrogators were Air Force too, or
No, the interrogators and the interpreters were all civilians.
really?
Mhm.
Okay, so we pull people from the civilian side
Yeah.
and then have them. Okay.
Mhm.
Was it?
And the
Was it?
interpreters were usually like locals, like.
Oh,
local
really? Just
residents.
working
Yeah.
with us?
Mhm.
Okay. Was the, so we work a lot with like other branches on deployments. Do we also work with like 3-letter agencies and stuff like that?
Oh yes.
Interesting. And then we also have the, what was the term you used? The foreign nationals?
Oh yes.
So it's just this big pool of like teamwork, but across the whole like.
Exactly.
Interesting. That's awesome. Did you have, and then of course for those that don't know, you have a son. How old is he now?
He's 5.
5. So okay, so he wasn't around for any of the deployments, right?
No.
Okay, is that something that you're gonna ask Miss Suarez about, like how it is being a mother on
definitely.
on deployments? What are you going for commissioning?
The first thing I want to go for is ABM, but if I don't get rated, I won't be like super crushed.
Right.
If not, maybe public affairs, or I wouldn't mind doing intel again, force support.
Right.
So
Okay.
those are on my list.
So you're still looking at some possible potential deployments on those AFSCs, right?
Yeah.
When was, so he was born before you joined the program, but you were still on active duty?
Yes, when I had him.
Yes.
Mhm.
So how was that? How was like the change in life from, okay, awesome, being like, single, just, doing your Air Force job, I think, if you were single, and then.
Yeah, it was a huge change. I think so he was actually really sick as a baby, and so then whenever maternity leave ended, and when I had him, it was still the really short maternity leave. I think it was like 2 months.
Mhm.
And so he was still really sick, and after I'm gone 2 months and I'm back at work, I kept getting called to, have him picked up from daycare because he was
Wow.
sick. So then it was like, well, I was constantly leaving work,
Mhm.
and that did rub off the wrong way with some officers.
Right.
And I think they just didn't really, like, those officers didn't have families, so,
So they didn't
maybe they just
understand.
didn't really understand, or they just thought I was just trying to get out of work,
Mhm.
or I'm not really sure, but
Right, but that wasn't the case at all.
No, not
Right.
at all. And I mean, if once your baby is sick, like, you can't bring them to daycare,
Mhm.
right? Because now they're being exposed to other children that
Right.
could also get sick. So whenever your kid's sick, like, it's like, hey, you gotta come pick them up, and they have to stay home for at least 24 hours before you can bring them back.
Wow.
So
Really struggling on the time and
exactly.
the balance and all of that. That's unfortunate. He's doing better now though.
Oh yeah,
Awesome.
it
Glad
was,
to hear that.
It was just like as a baby, I guess it was just something that he had to grow out of. But
Right. Yeah, I see him. Sometimes you'll bring him to the attachment, at least,
Yeah.
especially before the pandemic, and we see him running
Yeah.
around and helping out with like we're both part of Booster Club since we joined the program pretty much. So during all those Booster Club socials that we used to have, like, he was out here, little mascot for us. I know. It's pretty dope kid. Yeah, I guess so. We just got I know you see a bunch of the other cadets moving around and stuff. We just got the heads up that Ms. Suarez is here, so we'll just keep chugging on. And I think they're briefing her right now, and then they're gonna bring her in, and we'll sit her down, and y'all can talk about, and I'll be here as well. We can talk about more about the mill-to-mill experience, because I think you're lined up for that as well, right?
Mhm.
You're kind of on track
Yeah.
for the mill-to-mill stuff, and then mother on active duty, which I'm sure you have some questions about, or at least interested in the conversation. And then we'll get into like the Latino officer experience. That all that kind of stuff is listed here. Before we get her on though, I do want to thank you for coming on, spending your time with us. I know there was that 30-minute delay with the whole confusion of the scheduling stuff. And then again, for the audience, I brought Cadet Stewart on because, so retired Lieutenant Colonel Suarez is she commissioned from DET 842. She was prior E when she was at DET 842. She returned as cadre, and now she's up at the Southwest region. So for the GMC, I'm pretty sure all the POC have heard this term before, Southwest region. That's the region that the detachment falls in, because the nation is split into 4 regions across AFRTC headquarters. So DET 842 is part of Southwest Region, so Ms. Suarez works up there now. But she had that mill-to-mill experience that we talked about. She was a mother on active duty, and then the Latino officer experience, being both from that heritage, and then also being, you know, a woman in the military. Those similarities just, and I mentioned this to you, just stuck out to me, and I was thinking the whole time, okay, like, cool, you know, mother, all right, we only know a few mothers in the detachment. Cadet Stewart's one of them. Mill-to-mill, I'm gonna have you on Snapchat. I've seen some stuff, so I think you're on that mill-to-mill thing, and then obviously you're here at DET 842. She has that experience, so yeah, I can't thank you enough for coming out and flexing with us, you know, and then really trying to get this together, get this conversation out to the rest of the detachment.
Awesome, thank you.
I guess they're still briefing her, so we'll just keep talking. What are you looking forward to? Because we're both going to field training this summer, and I think we're part of the earlier maxes, is what Kadri's saying. What are you looking forward to at field training, and then coming back from field training?
Honestly, I think I'm just really looking forward to the experience of it all. I feel like we just keep hearing all these stories. Everyone comes back with like different stories about field training,
Right.
so I guess I'm just really interested to see like what our stories will be like
Yeah.
when we come back.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that too, and I know you mentioned, you know, like one of your favorite parts about ROTC is the people, and that's something that seems really big over there. Is like, you know, you're thrown into a flight with random people from around the nation, all the other detachments, and it's like you gotta make really quick connections with these people to work as a flight in order to get the job done, and so I think that would work in our benefit since we're already interested in you know, kind of the teamwork aspect of things.
Exactly.
Do you have you done your vision briefing for AS class?
No, not yet.
No? Do you have like a vision you want to, like you're looking forward to implement into the detachment next semester?
Sure. I guess you're asking me about my vision.
A little bit. You don't got to go too far. Give the whole 3-minute briefing, but hi. Okay, so Ms. Suarez is here. Ma'am, if you want to go ahead and join us, we're live right now, and then you can have this seat, and we'll get into right here, ma'am.
Okay.
Cool. We'll get back to your vision briefing later.
Yeah.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. Hi.
Jennifer Suarez.
Hey, Abra Stewart.
Nice to meet you. Good to see you again, dear.
Good afternoon, ma'am. So we were just talking about some of our cadet life things. Cadet Stewart's prior E, and I just learned that you were also prior E when you were a cadet in the detachment.
Correct.
So we have some of the questions listed here that we wanted to run you through. The first one being right there in your background with a very diverse military resume. Can you please give us a rundown of your route up to the Southwest region today?
Wow, that's a lot. So, geez, where do I begin? Let me think back here. So I don't even want to say years because then that tips you guys off on how old I am. But I went to Michigan State University for a couple of years, and when I was a junior, I actually left because I had an opportunity to become a linguist and learn Spanish in the Army. And an acute recruiter caught me feeling like a broke college student, and I was like, well, let me go and try something different and see if I like it and everything. And I did. And so I was prior service Army, and I did a linguist job for almost 4 years. And when did my first overseas tour in Panama, just after Just Cause, and right around the time that Desert Storm was happening. So I had siblings that were, one was in Saudi Arabia, one was in Korea, and I was in Panama. So it was a very weird dynamic in our family going on that year and stuff. But had a good time, loved my job. And then when I came back from Panama, I went to Fort Ord, California, and that base was tied up in a BRAC. And do you guys know what a BRAC is? It's a base realignment. So what happens is lots of politicians vote on whether or not they want to keep a base, and so that one was going to close down. And I was able to get out a few months early to start college back up, and so that's what I did. And moved to Texas. I'm originally from Michigan, and moved to Texas, did some community college cleanup for my GPA.
Mm-hmm.
And then, no kidding, I was interviewing to be a cadet here at UTSA, and I was a walk-on to field training, because back then, you could walk on the field training if you passed a PFT and all of the kind of requirements that everybody else does. So everybody else was doing field training prep, and I'm like, what is that? I have no idea what that is. And that was when we were in the MS building. We were on the 4th floor there. We had 2 offices, and the rest were staff offices, and that was it. So
Wow.
you guys have a great
Wow.
area
Good setup.
here.
Yeah.
Very nice setup. And so yeah, so I went to field training at Tyndall Air Force Base, and
Wow.
in 1994, and then
Don't do the math.
yeah, please don't. And then commissioned in May 1996, and actually served as the gold bar at University of North Texas for a year before I went to Germany. And I basically have been a personnelist my whole career, and went to Ramstein, came back, went to Maxwell. I even did Maxwell as a Ops Air Force cadet, no kidding.
Wow.
And I ended up spending 6 years at Maxwell over 2 assignments. So yeah, garden spot. Anyway. But there's a lot of cool things there as far as like the mission and everything, so it was good. Spent 6 years at the Air Force Academy, and loved that. So I've kind of seen, the prior East side, I've seen the commissioning side, and then I've also seen the Academy cadet side, and they go through a lot as well. They really do. You really have to want to be there, that's for sure,
Yeah.
to go through the lifestyle that they do. So, and then did some time I did a 365 in Iraq, and then came back here, and so yeah. Between those places, when I was in the Army, I moved just as much as I did in the Air Force, so that's kind of funny, but that's true. So yeah.
Interesting. And so
Yeah.
you did come back to the detachment as a cadre member.
I
correct?
did. I was an instructor in 2010. When I came back from Iraq, we moved here, and no kidding, the first person I met was Mr. Yano.
Wow.
Yep, and at that time, Tech Sergeant Ramirez was here, and so he and I became very, very good friends. He kind of showed me the ropes of the detachment life and that kind of thing, and we just had a great staff that year. I found out I was being promoted to Lieutenant Colonel when I started here, so I didn't get to stay long. I got to stay for 1 year, and then they booted me out, and then Colonel Hunt, now Mr. Hunt, drafted me to go work at the region. And so, so it was nice to be closer to home, because I lived on Randolph Air Force Base at the time, but I really missed being here and being
Right.
with the cadets and all that kind of stuff. It was a lot of fun.
Great. And so now you're up at the region, and I do, if you don't mind, kind of
No, not at all.
this listed, I had some notes. So yeah, like we mentioned, you commissioned from the detachment,
Mhm.
returned as cadre for a year before
Yep.
you got promoted and
Yep.
booted, and then you
Mhm.
moved up to Southwest Region. So on here I've listed, you're one of the few individuals who have this Mr. Yano type attachment to the history of the detachment.
Mhm.
What were or are your favorite parts of 842, and how would you describe its growth over the years?
Well, I tell you, it's always been a growing detachment. UTSA, back when I first started looking at coming here, one of the reasons why I love the school so much is because it was so small. Well, those days are gone, because it's tripled in size, I think, from the time that I left, probably doubled in size at least. And so it's a much bigger school than what it used to be. And we used to be DET 40A, I'm sure you guys know that, 840A. So we were a
Right.
subset of Texas State, which was Southwest Texas at the time. So no kidding, as when I went to field training, I had actually gotten accepted to both schools, and I was trying to figure out which one I was going to go to. But I think what really made me decide is that, no kidding, one of my flight peers was, she was a cadet here. And she's like, oh, you gotta come here, this is gonna be a lot more fun, blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, okay, it'll be a good time and everything. But what I love is that everybody's always been pretty close here, even when the detachment is big. And you gotta think about it, in the mid-90s when I was here, probably about a third of our detachment was prior service, because it's such a big commuter school here. And so a lot of people saw UTSA as a very flexible university before online and all that other kind of business. People could come here and and finish and knock out school. They've always been great here about having night classes and that kind of thing. So it offered a lot of flexibility for folks who were coming back as cadets, who had families and that kind of thing and wanted to commission. So that's one of the things I've really always loved about it here too, is San Antonio. Come on now, it's great here. Love it here. 3, our facilities, just the fact that we've got a lot of veterans here at UTSA that have worked really hard to get us the space that you all have now. So it's wonderful to see you guys have the facilities to, no kidding, do your mission here, have your events here. We didn't have that. And so we used to make terrible jokes about, somebody needs to die and leave us a lot of money that, is associated with the detachment. But fortunately, nobody had to do that. And they gave you they gave you guys a lot of space along with the Army. But it's because there's a lot of veterans that really care about the detachments, both the Air Force and the Army one, that worked with the leadership here to get you guys the building space. And that's phenomenal. You guys have one of the nicest detachments, I would say, in the nation.
Really?
Yeah, you
Interesting.
definitely do.
And not see it in that perspective. But moving on, kind of past the detachment stuff into more of the personal topics, I called it, that we emailed back and forth about very briefly. And this is why I brought Cadet Stewart on. So you have experience with mill to mill and being a mother on active duty, and also you mentioned you want to talk about your lieutenant officer experience. So for the first topic, I kind of combined mill to mill plus the mother on active duty stuff. What were common struggles you faced as a mill to mill spouse and a mother on active duty? And then before you answer that, if you have any kind of like questions or anything like that, feel free to take it over from me.
Yeah, so I'm also a mom. So,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then prior service, like he was mentioning. So
Air Force too?
Air Force,
Nice.
yeah. I know you said you were prior Army. What made you go Air Force?
So, this is terrible too, but since we're talking, I always liked the teamwork and the camaraderie that we had with everybody in the Army. It was wonderful. I still have friends to this day that I talk to and still keep in touch with that were my Army buddies back then. But I loved the teamwork and the camaraderie aspect of being in the Army. I just didn't really want to be in the Army anymore, and I liked the travel and that kind of stuff. I had a great time. And so I thought, well, the Air Force might be fun to do because it's a different mission. It's a flight mission. And so let me see how that goes instead. And I never expected to retire, but I stayed a long time and I had, a lot of staff jobs and everything. I think because I was a staff officer most of my career, that made life a little bit easier for me versus being like a maintenance officer or somebody who's gone, or a pilot or something like that. So definitely I would say that I was fortunate from the perspective of being able to pretty much go home almost every night, even if I was busy and worked a lot and everything. But my kids grew up around everybody in the offices and stuff. So no kidding, when we were stationed at the Air Force Academy, I'd go sign them out, and the CDC or the youth center was right down the hill from the military personnel flight at the time. And so I always had snacks and stuff like that, and had a table in my office. I was an MPF commander, so they would just do homework and eat and drive my troops nuts and talk to them and, play jokes on them and everything. But again, I think I was fortunate enough to be able to have a job that was, because it was personnel centric, that my kids could kind of join in and be a part of that and everything.
That's
so
amazing.
Yes. Now, were there times that things were rough? Absolutely, especially when I went on my 365. I hated the thought of leaving my kids for a year. But when Uncle Sam calls you, it's pretty difficult to say no, especially when, for all those years I'd had such a good stable career and stuff. There was no way I was going to not go to Iraq like I was asked to. So
how old were your children when you had to go on your 365?
So they were, my youngest, who was going to be 20 next month, he was 8 at the time, and my daughter was 9, and my son was 11. So they're all 18 months apart, and so they're all kind of stair steps and everything, and so they were in that later years of elementary school, and my oldest was getting ready to start middle school. So it was tough, but again, fortunately, I had jobs that, I could kind of bring them in and stuff where I was like, here, watch a movie or a video or something while I work in my office and stuff. It helped a lot, for sure.
Yeah, that's amazing. What would you say are some struggles with the CDC, the child care on base, and how they accommodate to like mill to mill, or even to like single mother active duty types? So
those type of instances, those type of folks, fortunately, are a priority. So if you're a single airman and you're a single parent with children and stuff, you're going to be a priority, as well as mill to mill. I would say some struggles are, when I'll say when missions call for an enactment of a family care plan, right away they say, you know, oh, why can't you, you accommodate this mission or whatever it is that's going on at the time. You have a family care plan, you should be able to call somebody at the last minute and have them take care of your kids. And that's not always possible. It's not always how it is. And I know that for me personally, I always had a family care plan, but if I was going to be doing something long term, or I needed something that was coming up like an inspection, for example, I would bring a family member in to help me out, just so that I wouldn't have to worry about my kiddos not being taken care of. And that's because I had a very close, I have a very close family, so they really supported me for my career throughout the years, and so that wasn't an issue. But there's a lot of people who don't have that, and that's tough. That's really tough. So, but as far as the CDC and the youth centers and stuff, my kids, they loved growing up in those things. They really did. Made a lot of friends. There was a lot of diversity, and that's what they always loved, I think, about being around a base. So.
That's amazing. Do you have any insight on like the mill-to-mill experience?
So that's challenging and it's very stressful. My former spouse was a personnelist as well, and so it was always a little stressful when it came time for us to have to move, to figure out where we were going next, how we were going to pull it off, and how we were going to find a house and all that kind of stuff to move everybody to, and schools and that kind of thing. It's a little stressful. I would say that the AFPC, Air Force Personnel Center, is pretty good about trying to work those things out. Again, I was fortunate because I was a support officer. So I would say that for those folks who were flyers or intel or maintenance, it's tougher. It's a lot tougher because I saw a lot of that at the Air Force Academy, where you would have two cadets that wanted to get married, but they were in they were assigned two different airframes. And unfortunately, one would walk away. And so, no kidding, they would have to have interviews with the commandant at the time to talk about, are you sure you want to do this? And that's tough because we want our flyers to stay flyers and everything, but it's tough sometimes when, you send somebody to one base and they don't have that type of airframe available for the other person. So there's a lot of decisions that have to be made, and really they're personal. So, I never hold it against anybody for picking their family first. That's, to me, that's the most important thing and everything. But but if you got an F-16 slot, I would never want you to give it up just because there's not very many people who get that. I mean, or you for that matter. So they're tough to get.
Absolutely. I know with my experience being in, a lot of times if they were both active, once they started having families, almost always one would go reserves or guard. I guess being active and active was just,
It's
like
tough.
you said, like very tough.
It's tough, and I think it really depends on the mission, also the MATCHCOM that you get assigned to. So as you can tell, like my biggest operational assignment was when I was a lieutenant, and we ended up going to Maxwell, and then we went to the Air Force Academy, and then we went to Randolph, and so very AETC centric, where it was about education and training and students and stuff like that. So again, I was very fortunate to be able to have my family always with me, with the exception of the 365.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, we have a question on here that was, have you been on any deployments? But you mentioned your 365.
I did.
And so the follow-up was how did having a military spouse and children affect that deployment? What was that like?
A disaster. It was rough, because it's funny when I think about when I left. It was in 2009, and we were just on the cusp of a technology, just blow up. And what I mean by that is in a good way. So they used to call me on Skype, and I think I paid $100 a month for internet just in my little trailer that I had. There were no texting. There was no FaceTime, and well, there probably was, but I wasn't smart enough to have, all that kind of stuff. But a lot of things technologically are better now, I would say, to help people stay in touch and everything, especially, with the pandemic and everything. We have Zoom, we have Teams. I mean, people can touch you just like that now, just based on how things are. But back then, it wasn't as simple, and so it was difficult. And he was an MPF commander at the time, and so we cheated and brought in family again to help, because it's difficult. It's very difficult to manage all that. We were very fortunate, again, to have family members that could come in and handle that load for us, and so but it was tough, and I think I cried myself to sleep every night that I was away from my kids, because I missed them so much. So it was rough.
How did they handle it once you returned? Like, was there a, I guess,
Yeah.
an adjustment period?
Sure. I mean, it was a huge adjustment period, because they couldn't wait for me to come home, and I kind of thought I could just jump back into how things were, and so much had changed that that I had trouble jumping back into that role from that perspective. It was fine, but just getting used to driving again, and just getting used to, anticipating all of their needs. I had been by myself for an entire year, so no kidding, when I first got to Iraq, I wasn't packing lunches anymore. I wasn't packing extra clothes. I wasn't running people to soccer or swimming, and so that was crazy. It was like somebody just unplugged a treadmill and said, "Okay, go do your thing." And so I found that to be very difficult when I first got to Iraq, and then I kind of figured out my way around and how to be beneficial to the mission, what I could improve on, work on PME, that kind of stuff. And so that's what kept me busy that whole year, is getting everything kind of professionally, being able to do that, because when you're a mom, as you know, you don't really get a whole lot of time to yourself.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned the driving thing, because when I came back from one of mine, and mine was just a 6-month deployment, it was just, getting back to doing like all the little things that you didn't have to do anymore.
Sure.
And it was just like, you're driving, and I'm like, oh, I need to get gas. It's like, I haven't been to a gas station in months, and it's just like all the little tiny things that you're so used to doing in your daily life, that once you're deployed, like, everything's taken care of for you.
Sure.
Like, get all your meals here, work here, you can work out here, and that's it. So simple.
Sure. Very simple. Very boring in a way, but I guess everybody kind of knows how that feels now that we've gone through this whole pandemic.
Quarantine,
so kind of doing the same thing every day and stuff is very much like a deployment.
Very much.
That's interesting. I'm kind of excited, but at the same time, y'all are scaring me a little bit on the deployment side.
Well, I would say that when you're young and you're single and you're not married, it's a lot of fun, because you're just going to have fun, and you meet so many cool people, and I loved that part about it, and that's, I've always been one of those glass half full kind of folks, where I'm like, okay, who am I going to meet? This should be fun, and I've made lifelong friends, no kidding, while I was gone, but as a parent, you're like, okay, who's making sure that that they're getting haircuts, and who's taking them to the dentist, and who's taking them to the doctor, and what if Jonah at the time, so he's friends with my son. Right before I left for my deployment for about 6 weeks, he must have called me 3 times a week saying, "I'm having an asthma attack, I need to come home," because he knew I was leaving. And so, no kidding, he just wanted me to sign him out of school so he could hang out with me and run around the MPF and steal everybody's candy and stuff like that. So I'm like, "You're not having an asthma attack?" Yes, I am. So kids they kind of they handle it different ways. So definitely.
Well, do you have any more questions on the middle other stuff?
No.
So then moving on into the Latino officer experience, I watched part of your the veterans panel you were on for UTSA.
Oh, thank you.
There's some questions that I pulled from them too. But what was it like being a Latino in the military? Was there anything you noticed, or do you think the environment was any different towards you because of your heritage?
I don't know if it was different because of my heritage. I think being a single parent is probably more. And not to sound like a sexist or anything, but sometimes when you have 2 parents and one's a guy and one's a female, people tend to martyrize the guy. Oh, he's taking care of his family, he's a single dad, la la la. But when you're a female, you don't always get all that kind of, oh, you're a single parent, you're doing so much. No, it's more like, you look like you're putting on a couple pounds, or how come you didn't answer all my emails, or you know what I mean? It's just a little bit different. I truly hope that the culture is getting better when it comes to that kind of thing, because it definitely, there was a huge disparity, I would say, while I was active duty. And you're shaking your head because I'm pretty sure you understand.
We talked about it a little bit.
It's just different.
I had an issue when my son was an infant and he was sick all the time, and the CDC would always call me,
Oh yeah, you
hey,
got to go
have
get
to
them.
yeah, you have to come pick them up. And one of my officers just saw it like, oh, you're leaving again? Like, she just, you know, kept having me like come into her office and explain to her like, why was I leaving? Why don't I have somebody to watch him? Or, you know, why isn't he at the CDC? And I think like, I was trying to tell him like, you know, people that don't have kids, like, I guess it's really hard for them to see like all of the struggles that come with
Oh,
it.
sure. The getting up 2 hours early just so that you're work on time, and
Mhm.
you know, getting their day ready so that you can leave and go to work and not have to worry about all the things you may or may not have forgotten for them. Now it's funny because when I was in the Army, we used to pull CQ, and that was when you have to, you know, do 24-hour duty. And I remember them always. We worked, so no kidding. The unit headquarters office was in the barracks, and so all of us lived. Everybody who was single, we all lived in the barracks, in a Navy barracks, and so the disparity on that end was, just pull one of the single people. They don't have kids, you know, they can work every weekend and that kind of stuff. So, you know, I've seen both sides of it, where it's like, okay, hey, Lieutenant Okada, you ain't got nothing going on, so we're just gonna grab you and you're gonna do XYZ because you don't have kids or a wife or whatever, and that's not fair either. So, but you know, that's how it was. So.
That's interesting. I think this is really valuable information for all of the cadets that are watching and will watch and listen to in the future, because we're all trying to commission, right? I think this is really important to keep in mind when we run into our airmen, or whatever the case may be. I guess, you know, like there could be other branches that we're working with too, and especially if they have kids, like you got to keep in mind like there's different struggles that we don't know about if we don't have that same situation. So I want to thank both of y'all for talking about that. It's really opening my eyes. I'm definitely gonna keep that in mind when I, hopefully, fingers crossed, commission.
Well, and it's important, and I will say this, because you may have an airman that's just really, you know, top notch and struggling and that kind of thing, but they may be raising kids and stuff. But that doesn't mean that airman is any less of a professional.
Right.
They just may need some help, you know, or they may need some resources and stuff. And so that's the one thing about being in an FSS. I learned a lot about different resources, and plus I used a lot of them myself. To be able to give parents a night out and take in, you know, if they need an oil change, you know, a lot of times the Airman Family Readiness Centers will have coupons and just little things like that just mean the world to somebody who's trying to, you know, have a good career and also, you know, balance a family. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's just, you know, a nuclear family with a spouse there that can help with all of those things. It's tough when you know, I used to pay for everything. I've had somebody paying for my house. We would eat at the club 3 times a week and bring food home just so that there was always food home if I didn't have time to cook and that kind of thing. So, you know, you figure it out, but man, it's tough. It's really tough. There's no greater challenge of organizational skills than being a parent on active duty, I'd say. Yeah.
I'm sure you can relate to that.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, so in relation to the previous question, I was going to ask, was there any type of stigma you faced when in the Army, and in that same type of stigma transition to when you joined the Air Force? I know that you mentioned the like parenting or the parental like stigma. Did that follow you from the, or you were?
I wasn't a parent when I first came in the Air Force and stuff, but what I noticed is that, no kidding, when I was enlisted, you know, I had more fun because there was less eyes on me, and I could do other things and hang out with the guys and hang out with, you know, everybody, just kind of hang out and have a good time and everything. And when you become that second lieutenant, even though you and I might be the same age, but if you're enlisted and I'm an officer, you know, you just can't do those same things that you used to. You can still hang out with them, but you can't, you know, do the things that you used to do because, again, you're a commissioned officer. And so you might have a good time, but then, you know, your NCOs are going to expect a certain level of behavior and from you, and so, you know, it's different. It's very different when you change sides.
Interesting. And so moving into my next question, and your experience for both of y'all, how's the Air Force adapted to diversifying the force over the years, and is there anything you think the Air Force should do or continue to do in order to keep up the diversification?
That's tough. So recently I had to do a scholarship ceremony, and the guest speaker was Major General Levitt, and she actually spoke about a lot of the diversity issues in the aviator community and how for so long it was all tailored to, you know, young white males. And females, even minorities in the aviary community, wasn't something that you really saw, and how still today you don't really see much of that, and how there's a lot of barriers that we don't realize are there that are sort of contributing to that. And one of the things that she mentioned was on the your Pixum score on the TBAS. When you take the TBAS, if you have flight hours on there, that raises your score,
Right.
and it raises your chances of getting an aviator slot. And how she said that that was unfair to, you know, a lot of people on, I guess, like a lot of minorities, it's typically that come from lower income families that maybe aren't able to pay for those flight hours because it's really expensive. So that's another barrier that's sort of like an invisible barrier that's being put up, that's already putting people at an advantage and at a disadvantage.
Right.
So I thought it was very interesting.
It was interesting.
So Deb Lovett used to be my assignments officer
Oh,
when
that's
she
so
was
awesome.
Captain Lovett. Yes, and so so I know her from way back when, and she's absolutely right. One of the things that I'm not a particular fan of, and of course let's just forget my position of where I work right now, but the AFOQT, I mean, I don't know if that's truly a measurement of leadership. I mean, if you guys are already taking the SATs and ACTs, why do you need the AFOQT? And if you're not going to be rated, then why do we need it? So I'm sure there's some big brain reason for it. I don't know what that is, and but I do believe that, you know, standardized tests are you know, I don't know if they're a true measure of somebody's leadership potential. I really don't.
She
And,
mentioned that same
sure,
thing as well.
Sure. And it'll be interesting to see how all the students do that are going to college in the fall, because a lot of the universities around the nation have thrown out those standardized tests and have not used that as a measurement for college admission. So
Wow.
we'll see how that goes.
So when these types of topics get brought up, is there anything else that comes to either of your minds that you feel like you want to or feel the need to mention? The whole mill-to-mill stuff, we talked about being a parent on active duty, being a minority and serving in the military, both enlisted and officer.
I don't.
I would just say that that you have to work hard no matter what. I mean, everybody has to work hard no matter what. And I think sometimes when you are a minority, you have to work harder. Sometimes I think when you're a woman, you have to work harder. Are those things fair? No, they're not. But they are what they are. And so just remember that you never know who's watching. You never know who's watching you. I know for me, as I went up in the ranks, I'm very uncomfortable with a lot of attention. I'm pretty good in crowds, you know, of like smaller social things, but I don't like big. I don't like a lot of attention as far as like, guess what? Okada, that name sticks out like a sore thumb on a base. So, so people are gonna go, oh yeah, you know, that major or that colonel or whatever. I mean, your name sticks out. So, to be mindful of those things, because for me, I know that I wasn't very comfortable with a lot of that attention, especially when I was a commander. And even though I'm very good with people, I just did not embrace that whole, God, why is everybody scrutinizing me, or why is this, and it wasn't that everybody was, but I know in my head I had high standards for myself, and so if I felt like I wasn't doing something that maybe I could have done better, maybe if there would have been, you know, 40 hours in a day versus 24, I was very hard on myself. So I would say to be forgiving, take care of yourself. Self-care is a thing. You have to, you know, you have to feed your body, you have to feed your mind, and take things in the stride, and to be a little slower to react. Sometimes I think we want to solve problems so quickly that we don't think about things and give ourselves time to process certain things, because we feel like leadership wants answers and that kind of stuff. Sometimes it's okay just to take a step back and just look at something and evaluate it as a whole before you start firing off emails and that kind of thing. So I would say that those are very important things to keep in mind when you go on active duty.
Awesome, thank you. Moving into, I mean, you've had this like, what's a good word for you? You've been around the military environment for a good amount of time, right? Like the
Yes.
Sorry,
He's so
man.
nice.
We were talking about enlisted Army, then, and I'll restate it again. Did A42 cadet, commissioned, you had a whole, your Air Force career, and then you came back and you did your cadre for a year, and then now you're up in the Southwest region. And so I'm just interested as to what inspired you to join the service in the first place, like what motivated you, and how did that change, if it did, over the years to continue to stay in the environment and kind of help out and keep your hand in the pot?
So I think initially the reason I joined is because I just wanted to leave Michigan. Have you ever been to Michigan? You get 9 months of cloudy and bad weather, and then 3 months of summer if you're lucky, and then it gets cold again. So I was ready to leave, and because I was at Michigan State and getting ready to start my junior year, I just remember being kind of a broke college student going, okay, I don't know what I really want to do. I don't know if I should be here spending all this money doing something that I'm not really convinced that I want to do. And like I said, recruiters, they smell that boy, and they can find you. So one of the reasons why I actually came in is because I had like an enlistment bonus, and again, I was able to go to the Defense Language Institute to become fluent in Spanish, because I grew up in a household where my dad did not teach us that, because in his generation, they would get in trouble in school and get whacked and that kind of thing, get grounded, get punished, that kind of stuff. So we did not grow up speaking Spanish fluently in our home. So the appeal to leave Michigan was there, and I had family members that were veterans of a lot of veteran family members that had Navy time and Army time, and I don't think anybody had. I had one cousin that was in the Air Force, and so I just thought, well, let me do this for a little bit, get some money for school, and see how it goes from there. And like I said, I knew I didn't want to stay in the Army, but I was like, Air Force, that might be okay. Right. And I just got hooked on the lifestyle, the travel, the team dynamics. I loved it. My first big squadron was a maintenance squadron. There was 600 people in there. Oh, wow. And we had 9 different shops, like prop shop and ammo and fab flight and avionics. And so that was a completely different world for me, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So it was very non-traditional for a personnelist, but at the time, the Air Force used to put section commanders in all kinds of units and stuff. So that was good. And I think I probably had the best office ever. Like the Thunderbirds would come and visit, and they would park right in front of, I was right there. It was wonderful. And so I really, really, how I changed, I guess, is I just kind of got more ingrained in what we were doing and just helping people. Because being at an operational base, you realize that those guys are on shift work, and they don't always have the same kind of time as you have. And so for me, it was like anything that I could do to make that maintainer's life easier, or that cop's life easier, or the pilot's life easier, then we're going to do that, just so that they have more time to concentrate on what they need to do and then go on crew rest or have their time with their families and stuff. So right. I really, really got sold on the mission of the Air Force. I loved it, and so yeah, I wouldn't trade that for the world. I absolutely had a blast. So.
Is that something that you can relate to as well?
Yeah, I think so. So on my first reenlistment, one thing that the general that was doing my reenlistment told me was that whenever you enlist, you think of I'm answering the call, right? Like in our creed, but whenever you're reenlisting, it's like you're no longer answering the call. It's now you're calling, right? You know that this is something that you want to keep doing. This is something that it's kind of like in you to keep being a part of something larger than yourself.
That is very true. So the first time when I went to MEPS to swear in for the Army, I'm like, yeah. And I said everything. When I commissioned here, I was shaking because I knew what that meant. And so just a very subtle difference, but like you said, you either know or you don't. And so when you know, it's a completely different meaning, I think, that you're going to give a lot of yourself and a lot of your time to the Air Force and to the mission.
Right. That seems like something that's very like the common ground for everybody that's in the military, at least has done that one reenlistment or one like extending their service, because they all feel like that same feeling of, okay, I'm gonna keep doing this. Like, it's something I want to do. So that's awesome to see. Before we end the podcast, do you have any advice in terms of leadership for our cadets? Anything for those that are about to commission in a couple months? Yes,
like I said, stay focused. don't worry about if a tech sergeant doesn't salute you right away at the gate.
Right.
That's always a question that comes up. I don't know why. But just be a team player. When you're a lieutenant, you know, airmen react one of two ways with brand new commissioned folks. They either are super excited and go, oh yeah, you know, this person's here now and they're a lot of fun, or they're really engaged, or oh my God, we got to train somebody else. So be that person who's excited to be in that mission, because that is important. You want them to look at you like, hey, I'm a team player and I'm happy to be here and I want to learn this, and they love it, you know. Because I was a section commander, you know, I had a first sergeant who would go out at Ramstein and he'd deliver cocoa to people on the flight line, and that was fun. And people appreciate things that you do, just little subtle things that you can do to show that you're really engaged and that you care. And that is more important, I think, than anything. That nobody cares what you're doing, how you're doing it, until they know that you care about about them. And so definitely keep that focused and everything. And like I said, take care of yourselves, because it's easy to try to do everything and answer everything. You're never going to get everything done. Trust me, I would try. And I remember lots of times where I was like looking at my BlackBerry while I was trying to have fun, and it just doesn't work. So just be engaged at the moment with whatever that is that you're doing, because that's super important. And people, again, they're looking at you to see if you're doing your job, or are you like observing what's going around. Do you have a good feeling for your squadron and that kind of thing? So that's super important. And finally, you know, don't forget to ask for help. When you need help, you need to speak up. Bad news never gets better with time. So
Right.
if you need help, and if you feel like you're drowning, you definitely need to reach out. No one is ever going to get upset with you unless you just appear to be lazy and not want to do something to not help you. So definitely make sure that you're reaching out if you have to do that and stuff. And you know, it's important to get to a base. You guys stick out like sore thumbs. You know, get involved, get active, and do things with your unit. Things are weird right now. They just are. You feel so isolated when you first get commissioned anyway, because when you show up on a base, you know, there's very few butter bars that are walking around and everything. But with COVID right now, things are even, I think, more isolated. And so just make sure that you're keeping in touch with folks so that you don't feel like you're on your own island doing your own thing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you both for coming on and talking. We really appreciate it. This is valuable information, like I've said, and we'll soon put it on Spotify, so everything that we mentioned can be listened to in the future by, you know, whatever cadets run through the detachment in the future.
We're not going to talk about the time I met you, the first time I ever met you.
Awesome. I was wondering if you were going to bring that up, ma'am. So this is a funny little story. Feel free to jump in and correct me, because my memory on this is very foggy, and that's for a good reason.
Because you were asleep?
I was asleep. So we kind of mentioned this when Count Vato was on the podcast last time. I think she was Cadet Poole, did she?
Yes, Allie.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Right. And so we were talking about how my stepdad was cadre here from, I think, like 2012 to 2016.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I would come to the detachment, this very area, and run around as a little 12, 13-year-old kid, kind of steal snacks and watch, you know, the TV and stuff like that. We had games in there, so we would do that. And sometimes you guys would even host like little events here, and then also at
at my house, yes.
And so one of those events was at your house, and I remember my dad packed up the whole family and we went over, and I don't know what happened that day. I guess I was just super drained from, I don't even know if we had school or what, but I was just, you know, and so we get there and I pass out on a couch upstairs, and I think that's how it went. And then I think it was Jeshua, your oldest son, that came and was like shaking me. He's like, hey man, like wake up. And I'm like laying on my side, and I'm like waking up, and I see all three of the kids staring at me. All three of your children just like staring at me, and I was like, huh? And they were like, hey, like, you know, like trying to introduce themselves, and I'm still waking up, and I was like, man, what's going on? Like, I don't even know, like, just got here to Texas type thing. Yeah, that was the story. I don't know how it was from your perspective.
Yeah. Well, we kind of show up like a gang, and so you're like, hey, you're the only other person here at our age and stuff. So yeah, so kind of like that. But it's great to see that you've developed so well, and that you're part of the DET 842 heritage. It's wonderful.
Thank you. It's been an honor trying to carry out the legacy that everyone's left here.
Absolutely.
So yeah, like I said, thank y'all both for coming on. It's been a real pleasure. Really valuable information. I can't thank y'all enough. And yeah, with that, we'll end the podcast and we'll see everyone next week.
Thank you.